So, hi, everybody. And I want to address my first question to our guest, Lila. You speak 7 languages, you hold 3 passports, you've lived in so many different places. Where is home for you?
Well, hello, first of all, and thank you. I don't deserve all the praise at all, but thank you. I'm very happy to be here in Jerusalem. I spent the first 15 years of my life being stateless, which means I had no passport at all. We had to write stateless in documents, so I also know what it means not to have a passport. So, on the other hand, all my passports seem like false papers to me. And I still, when I cross borders, I still feel slightly paranoid when an officer is looking at me, and I don't feel I have a home. I was brought up in Paris, and I love Paris. I love French culture and I'm very grateful to its education. But I really feel there's a small creature, which in French is called a Bernard l'ermite, which doesn't have a shell, so it always goes to sleep inside the shell of other animals. and I would say that I feel quite like a Bernard l'ermite. I feel at home nowhere and everywhere.
Excellent. Your first book is about Nabokov, another exile immigrant. We're going to discuss the difference between immigrants, exiles, and the refugees later. And one of the segments I remember quite vividly from the book, which I've also read most recently, is the fact that you say you've visited. You're speaking about yourself because it's essentially an experience of reading, and you say you've visited many places, but you always felt that the lost homeland of your parents were somehow a lost golden age, and everything else seemed just to wane in comparison.
Yes, it's true. I think, I grew up in a funny situation, which is I really grew up with Iranians speaking Persian at home, but with really most extraordinary people. I was very fortunate. My mother brought in a lot of people, and most of them had lost everything, and they were artists and writers and philosophers, sculptors, and all they talked about all the time was Iran. Every night, and they spoke about cities I hadn't seen, and villages I didn't know, and mountaintops, and people, and what happened, and why the Islamic Revolution, and what had we done for this Islamic Revolution to happen in our country. That where my father, born in 1930 in Teheran, remembers 1936 dancing teas, accompanying his mother to dancing teas and having women in short skirts sort of dancing. 1936 Tehran, no veils. Women did not wear, stopped wearing the veil. In the 30s. So in fact what happened is that it became a sort of a very strong paradigm for me because I imagined the whole country. And my father once told me, perhaps you should never go to Iran because you will be disappointed. And I did. I grew up with an imaginary country entirely. The street names have been changed. The country has been in part. Tehran has become this massive, polluted, I think, huge thing. And so I think there's a very strong connection between that and the act of writing, and of course literature.
Thank you. I have to throw this straight back at you, Dorit, because
I can see why.
So yeah, it's I'm going to ask 2 questions.
Every question you're going to suggest, the answer would be the same as Lila's. I mean, it's just unbelievably similar. Resembles the experience of Jews immigrating from Iran to Israel and keep on longing back to their homeland and speaking about it so passionately and always with their eyes shut, as if they cannot bear the reality in order to recall the memories. And for an Israeli kid, I would have listened to their memories being told in Hebrew and maybe had their longings synced in me. Writing my first novel was imagining what they have seen under their eyelids.
And that's why I would imagine your eyes, or at least your inner eyes, would have been very much open when you've imagined places that you've never been to and conjured a longing to a place that you've never been to.
Yes, and for me it was never concrete, as you mentioned, because my parents, they were young when they immigrated, and my grandparents, They came from the Jewish ghetto within the major cities of Isfahan and Teheran. And I think that for them, it wasn't as concrete that maybe for for Iranians who are not a minority within the society. But I must take it, sorry, to be very. I am worried about. Let's say that my first novel was more to do with the Persia, with the imaginary, fictionary Persia, and those distant, maybe 1001 Arabian Nights kind of glorious memories or territories. I read a few years ago a reportage of exiles who had moved, maybe like your family, from the political current Iran after the revolution, and their experience and the time before the revolution had broke, and how they could not sense that it's about to change their life and to be so dramatically restage the whole reality in Iran. And for me, ever since I read this text, I keep on walking through the Israeli streets and Israeli reality news and keep on wondering, are we facing maybe some...
I thought we were going to get to this towards the end.
I had such a political year. I cannot look at anything and not see politics in
everything. Everything is political.
Everything had become political, even if maybe
I'm just
I was naive.
Quickly bounce back and in order to let Shimon talk, but I want to say I also feel that way. I think it's part of our collective trauma, and I relate to it very much. In fact, so much so that all my life I've always thought, okay, well, what if this explodes right now? What am I going to do? What's my plan B, C, and D for a career? I might be a terrible cabaret singer, or I'll be a tour guide, you know. And so, no, I know exactly what you mean. I think, yes.
Yeah, we are unfortunately live with kind of an ingrained perpetual refugee mentality.
I thought being so in such anxiety, it's the destiny of Israelis, but I can see you.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you, Shimon, starting with, the fabled town you hail from, which has now become subject, it's your poems about Sderot are being taught in school systems and eulogized, but it seems to me that it's a fictionalized town for you, and in your writing, in as much as your more fantastic places are fictional.
Well, I think you're right, but first, Dorit, you had the great honor to be banned from the educational systems. I wish I would
he was banned
someday.
Too.
I'm not
result in a surge.
I'm not controversial enough.
You're going to be remembered for your talent. I'm sorry, I can't avoid this.
But anyway, for me, the experience is kind of different from both of you because my parents came from Morocco when they were children. And for them, it was a different experience for my father and for my mother. But the similarity between their experience was coming to Israel was kind of they had a break in a way. There is something in the continuity of their life was broken, and it was also. It also was a gap within their inner self. In a way, the part of the people that they left in Morocco were parts that could not be spoken anymore. And in a way, they could not tell their stories. My mother came when she was 12, and for her, it was also growing up, for her 12 was the age in which she became a woman. And coming to Israel was also becoming a woman. So she also left her childhood behind, and her childhood is kind of a mute story. Whenever I tried, it wasn't as if we didn't want to listen as children, like me and my brothers. They never spoke about it in a way. They couldn't bring themselves to tell their story about their place of origin. So for me, Morocco first is kind of dark. Vista. There is nothing there. Yeah, I see. My father's hometown is called the White City because it's white, but I cannot see the whiteness there. I only see like the evening going down or just the sun falling on the city. So for me, there is no part of longing to another place.
Okay.
So, and my parents, because they came from Morocco, they couldn't really belong. So they were in a state of continuing longing to the place in which they were. So there were always this kind of gap between the place, the physical place, and the place that they were supposed to come to and never got to. So every place became already a representation of another place for them.
It seems to me
and it was,
yeah,
excuse
sorry.
me, yes.
No, it seems to me the hallmark of all of your characters, what you're just describing now.
In a
People
way,
are always
in a way, yeah. In a way, it's the structure of my fiction. There is always a physical place on which another place is already being forced. And it's a product of imagination because you long to this place, it doesn't exist, it's not part of your experience. But there is another facet to it, because another aspect. Because my father was a very religious person. So we used to study text together. So my first home is a text. But anyway, the text, mostly Jewish, sacred Jewish texts. And there is something strange about Israel, because Israel, there is another map of Israel which you can find in the Bible, and you can find in the Mishnah, and you can find in the Talmud. And every place has this kind of aura because it's so ancient. And you go to Beersheba, but Beersheba is also a place where Abraham lived. And you come to Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is full of mythology. So for my father, Israel was first a mythological country in which no mythology could exist because the physical didn't really match the mythology. So for me, it's all about being in this gap, stepping, from both sides of the gap, from the physical place to the imaginary place.
Wow, I'm getting a better insight both of your sci-fi fiction and the regular one, but I want to throw this back at you, Lila, because you said language is, I don't exactly remember how you said it, but language is your place, your natural place, and I want to think of Heidegger's famous words that language is the home of being. And
Poetry, I think.
Yeah,
yeah,
it's a Dichtung. It's a kind of poetic kind of language. I think this is in a way what Shimon was trying to say for you, maybe, that this is your place of being. And is it true for you? Do you think this is a place for a writer?
Yes, of course. And I mean, in a very prosaic way, I mean, I always get embarrassed when people mention the fact that I speak languages, but I think a part of it comes from a place of insecurity and of longing to fit in. I always wanted to fit in. So I always want to deconstruct a language, reconstruct it like a puzzle, and tell the other, it's okay, we speak the same language. Now we can talk. What we were talking about at the last panel, and look at them in the eyes. But I want to come back and for sure, and so language and writing, both speaking and writing, has become this perpetual bridge that I try to build, and also it's a way to, this longing also is a longing to belong. So you always trying to master language is always trying to belong. But in my case, I write in English, which is a language I learned late, and I can never fully master. So there's always a level of insecurity also built into my English, and I'm very fortunate that I met wonderful editors and people who actually like the fact that there's a foreignness that I introduce. There's an unfamiliarity that I introduce in the English language. But to bounce back quickly on what you said, it really, really speaks to me. And I think actually the way you defined even your experience of Israel, to me, between mythology and something that is superimposed upon it and that just doesn't fit, I think really is a definition of literature. I think that's what Joyce does in Ulysses. What I love so much about Ulysses is exactly that, is that he chooses to foreground this, he calls it Ulysses, and then it's Dublin, and what's extraordinary is that he's talking about being in the library at Sainte Geneviève, and then he says, the scales of the dragon was moving in me, her golden scales, and he sees the season, there's something else, and it's never quite that, but that's what gives it its depth. And then the discrepancy between the mythological echo that's there but already lost, and what he's trying to grasp of it again, is the space of literature.
Dorit, I'm going to bounce this back to you quickly. Is writing an exterritorial experience to you? Do you always have to be outside of a place in a way, or a spiritual exile, maybe, of sorts?
I think we're doomed. I mean, it's not a matter of choice, and it's not a matter of will. And the most
Us in Israel, or
no,
us
us
as
writers.
humankind?
It's
Don't be so giddy about it. We're doomed.
So giddy, yeah.
No, we're
no,
not doomed. I disagree.
it's just being assimilated is something that not politically, not with the whole thing. Assimilation has become a dangerous term. Just trying to fit in, to belong. It's always a matter of it's on the verge of happening, never really fits in, and you have to have your distance to write. You have to have your inner maybe kingdom or queendom, if there's such a word.
I like it.
You like it? It happened to me. Well, at the time I lived in New York, I came up with all those strange
Concocted words.
words
Yeah.
that they were saying, it's nice, but there's no such word in English. But this is maybe another example of being an immigrant. But I think that while I'm writing any novel, I'm experiencing not only an imaginary city, it's maybe an imaginary self, or trying to adopt a part of me that is not explored in real life and try to live it up through the story. And
I'm thinking about in your last novel, there is a description of Tel Aviv in the spring, which we've just experienced, anyone who's been in Tel Aviv in the spring, and it just crossed my mind that it is almost as imaginary and fictionalized as the way you describe places you've never been to. So where does reality fit in?
I think it's the point of view of a tourist, that maybe your father was an internal tourist in Israel, that he experienced Be'er-Sheva in a mythological, glorified way, that the everyday life in Be'er-Sheva is so concrete and so common and so Israel today, that coming from overseas back to your home, you're being benefit with few days of seeing your own immediate home in new eyes, in some perspective that is new. It may be tragic when you go through kind of point of view for years and years, and having generations that observe this kind of foreignerness to the immediate
Foreigners, yes, being l'étranger. So for you, Shimon, it's true. You have this double liminality of sorts, because there is the ingrained exile that is the hallmark and the heavy burden of Jewishness that you somehow have to bear because of your affinity with the texts, and then the experience of immigration, which is different, very different, and we very quickly, I'm going to say that exile, I don't know, to me at least, conjures up exotic things like renegade Greek philosophers and Romans and White Russians, and it's not exactly the same.
When it's well sponsored. When it's well sponsored, then exile can be very, very exciting. Yeah. the whole yes. Tragic content of exile, when it's due to
coming from a privileged place. But I think in Jewish experience, or for you, exile is a very different thing. Can you say a little bit about it?
Yeah, first I'd like to point out there is a difference between the religious or metaphysical sense of exile and the political or geopolitical meaning of exile, which they don't coincide, especially in the Israeli context. First, for many generations, it's a well-known fact that Judaism really moved, or the way of thinking of the pattern of thought kind of oscillated between exile and redemption. Yeah, not exile and homeland. It's not so. It wasn't it didn't have to do anything with territory. Territory came afterwards. But first, people had to be redeemed. And it's supposed to be divine intervention. It's supposed to be brought upon the people. People couldn't do anything. The Jewish people couldn't do anything except, in certain parts of Judaism in which they could have adapted their life in order to bring forth the redemption or what's called Geulah, the salvation, by doing by abiding the law in a way, the Jewish law, doing or what's called the making themselves better people, according to Jewish to the way Jewish law held what a person should be like, and the political sense of exile in Israeli thought, which is kind of in the nationalistic interpretation of exile, it's opposed to homeland. So once you get a territory, then you're not in exile. When I turn back to my father's experience, which I think it's ingrained in me, and in a way it's also part of my way of thinking of the world, then there is this. He wasn't in exile anymore because he was part of a sovereign population in Israel, but for him he was still in exile because he hadn't been redeemed.
Part of also the predominant culture, or is that have anything to do with it?
And for him it was kind of in order to be part of the Israeli way of life, the price he had to pay was to discard his religious belief. So there is also another gap. The gap is really being expressed through the divide between the religious and the political. For me, I cannot say that I'm in exile, or I really know what being in exile means. But I know what it means to be a stranger within your home, what you call homeland, and this feeling of discomfort that you don't really fit, and there is this human tendency which is being, I think, worked into literature. The way Lila said, in a way that we are never. I'm just taking your words. I'm putting words into what you said. I'm not going to rephrase what you said. It's just a way of. So we take human basic human tendencies and we make them into construct of stories, and there is this human tendency never to be satisfied with what you get. So you want to belong, and once you belong, you want not to belong. You want to be in the state of longing, once you're in a state of longing, you want again to fit in.
It's just like love.
Yeah. And once
exactly.
Everyone, each one in his associations. I wouldn't call it love, but to each his own. What's called, yeah. So this also has this kind of dynamic in which you fit in when you don't master language. You never master language. Even if you are a native speaker of language, you have areas or territories of language in which you could explore further. But once you get to a level of mastering part of the language, then in a way you want to unlearn this experience in order to write true literature.
Completely, I agree. And I have that experience in French, which is the language that I think I perhaps speak best orally. And it's a language in which I have a French melody in all my languages. But the funny thing is, I'm an unfamiliar person. I'm a stranger to my own French, because often I speak French and I hear myself speaking French and I think, oh, I sound very native. I sound just like a French person. And this happens to me very often, which makes me feel, again, exactly what you said. I always feel like doubled up, and I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, that's almost what the Germans call unheimlich, like unfamiliarity in the language. And to go back to what you were saying about the Jewish experience, I think many years ago, with a friend of mine who now is the artistic director of the festival, we were sitting in New York in Central Park having a sandwich, and we were talking about American friends and non-American friends. And we were saying sometimes it's difficult to make American friends. And I said, but I have many American friends. And she said, Lila, all your friends are Jewish. What are you talking about? and which was funny. And I realized she knew all of them. And I realized immediately, and I knew that, and I've known that for many reasons and for reasons pertaining to my family's history also, that part of the reason why is that, to me, I think, as a double exile, both from Iran and also from Europe, there was something about, say, the common American experience that was a little bit foreign to me. There was a degree of cultural shock that I didn't really relate to it, to someone, just not knowing what was behind, 20 years behind them. But there is something, of course, in the Jewish experience and what you said about exile and redemption or the lack thereof that spoke deeply to who we are, and even who we are as Iranians. And there are deep connections that I've often talked about and written about between the Jewish experience and in Iranian history as well, and our peoples, in fact.
And that obviously relates to your fascination with Nabokov's
and also Joyce.
Of course, absolutely.
Enchantment with America and with foreigners and with being in exile.
Exactly. And Nabokov, very similar. Nabokov was married to a Jewish woman. He came from a family where in the middle, of pogroms going on in Russia, his family, in fact, his father spoke out against pogroms. His grandfather did too. And when they went into exile, they also went into multiple exiles because his wife was Jewish, because his son was Jewish, because of the Bolshevik Revolution. And he said exile was a syncopal kick he would not have missed for worlds.
There's something between a link or a bond between Iranian ladies and Nabokov. Have you noticed?
Yes, we discussed it on the way.
Yes, Azar
reading Lolita in Teheran.
I thought it was caviar, Iranian and Russian caviar, but it must be something else. But I want to ask you, Dorit, because we brought up the subject of language and the ethereal and the earthly, and many reviews, even early on about your work, it always accentuated the sensuality or the sensational sensuality of your writing, the sense, the colors. Would you say that is tainted from your Persian heritage, or is there any bearing on your language, on your Hebrew, from your ancestry?
Could be, and at the same time, could be the books I read. I can't. It's who we are as, and everything that I say, who I am and who we are. I can refer to so many communities in so many. Maybe it's who we are Israelis, who we are Jews, who we are as ex-Persians, and I don't know. Yeah, I grew up in an Israeli country reading European books, so my language of writing was shaped with the lullabies of Persian immigrants that I heard, and with Nabokov and Thomas Mann and the greatest novelists from Europe that I read. So it could be a mixture.
Okay, so to further sink in to that flowery Hebrew of yours, I want to take that and move into the subject of borders and boundaries. Your last book. Remind me the name in English. It's called
Border Life.
Border Life. Is about borders, about boundaries between people, nationalities, and states. And somehow it seems to me that your project in this novel and as a writer is to dissipate, to melt down.
Maybe as a wish, but the vista, maybe the educational, cultural landscape that we carry overseas, and when we mix with other languages, other cultures, is always maybe more strongly, maybe more demandingly printed in who we are, maybe more than we want to have, to be so shaped and so designed by these forces that our wish to melt in or belong or maybe like this verb that you used. Sorry.
because I very vividly remember the last few dozen pages maybe of your novel where language itself with imagery of water mainly, and I think that's true for all of your books. There's always somehow watery elements that invariably fuse people together, be it tears or the sea or sweat or some kind of watery element that invariably just topples down the borders, and the language itself just shines out and covers everything with
Thank you. Thank you.
oneness.
I take it. The tragic solution of having these two characters share the same
union
location at the end of the book is underwater, is a fantasy. This may be a very twisted, tragic binational state that I allow them to share at these moments of
an imaginary binational state,
yeah.
if we want to be true to our topic.
yeah, imaginary.
Yeah.
Yes, people weren't so. People expect some sort of a happy ending, them to unify and live happily ever after. But I think borders and boundaries are so much more rooted with our universal free spirits than we want to admit, than we wish to take responsibility for. And I'm letting them mix, but I'm letting those conflicts that they carry within them, because they carry the conflict within them. They're not truly free, and they're not emancipated through this free land of New York, of English, of intellectual consciousness. They still who they were and who they are and who they will be. Saying it to you being such a universal spirit, I feel so provincial, and this is my project, the provinciality within us, and how this ambivalency of being maybe with multicultures and multi-personalities due to all these cultures that we were fed with, we're very much limited to who and where. There's a phrase, beautiful phrase in Hebrew, that תבנית נוף מולדתנו, אדם הוא תבנית נוף מולדתו.
A cast of your
the way we
primordial landscape.
were molded
Yeah.
by the human landscape that we are raised in.
So two things here. First off, I'm thinking, Shimon, about your hybrid creatures and that kind of construct of many selves being fused together, primarily in your science fiction writing or fantasy writing. Can you say something about that in terms of borders or stepping out of boundaries?
First, it's a basic cognitive fact that we need some kind of confinement in order to recognize the world. We need some kind of categories. We need some kind of mean of organizing the world, so all our sensual data in order to experience anything at all. And so in a way, we need borders. We need, but it's one question whether we need them or we don't. It's another question how they express in reality.
And etymologically, as you pointed out earlier, the word borders in Hebrew, as in the title of your last novel, also means in Hebrew definition.
Definition, yeah. It's the same root.
It's the same root.
So the question, what you do with border, how do you undermine existing borders, and how do you make borders into, or you make holes within borders so you can move to the other side or let things from the other side move towards you. So as Dorit said, we are kind of, and we live in this kind of era in which we really believe that we are product of our own experience in the world, our biography, our background, and the books we read, the song we listened to when we were growing up, and I don't think that it's necessarily so, because I know that there is part of us that is already experiencing another reality all the time, and the question is whether we can, within writing, open some windows to these other realities that we experience, and sometimes we can touch it within the mundane experience. For me, it's I'm walking in the street and suddenly I see a man holding his head under his armpit, and it's just for one moment, and then things that I've seen, things that were appeared in my dreams are shaping to be reality in at one point of my experience. So in a way, I'm not trying to make it into I don't have any mystical argument here. I'm saying that's the way things are.
No,
and I think this notion of hybridity is first. So we are defined by our experience, but our experience is randomal. There is nothing essential to our experience, because we read one book, we could have read another book completely, and we could be a different person, different people every minute of our existence. So for me, it's always trying to explore this different person I could have been, had I had this kind of experience. And in order to do this, I'm trying to think as myself as this kind of. It's also banal, because Rimbaud already said that, when he said, "I'm the other."
So you may not have.
So in a way that I'm letting I'm trying to find literary vehicles in order to allow this experience to be expressed, of belonging not to one world, but to many worlds at the same time.
So you may not have a mystical argument, but the corpus of your work certainly suggests a mystical project of sorts, because it would seem like you attempt to conjure or charter ways and paths and ever more circuitous ways to another world that is possible, that is better than this one, that is an elsewhere.
I don't know that it's better. I know that it's different. And the more it's different, the more I'm fascinated by it. In a way that reality is not predestined. We have a choice. We do have free will. But this free will is, we also submitting this free will to all these kind of confinements that we adopt unconsciously. And I think that literature sometimes can help us reconsider our choices of confinements.
Okay, so this brings me to your literature and its, breach of confinements, I would say, because I told you in our brief conversation today that, as Nabokov said that Lolita was his love affair with language, to me your novel is very much a love affair with the experience of reading. And I, for one, as a reader, felt for the first time heralded that unsung, lonesome, dark, quiet task of reading is suddenly celebrated in a book. And that brings us to the topic of borders, because reader and writer fuse their bodies, very much like in Dorit's book. Their bodies, yours and Nabokov's, but also the book he wrote, and the reader, who is myself, who is reading that fusion. It all melts together with those vibrant.
Sounds very erotic, I must
It is. We were
add.
discussing that too, and I told you today also that there is always there's always something somatic and corporal about reading a taint of suntan lotion left on the page, curled toes. There's always something of the body to do with the experience of reading, which is very different from the spiritual exile we spoke of earlier.
Yes, I agree. I think it is an erotic experience, and I've always been interested in spaces of transgression, both being I realized I went to Catholic school as a child, and my parents never talked about religion, so I didn't realize that I wasn't exactly Catholic. I didn't know what I was until I was 9 years old, and the sisters came to me and said it was the time to do your communion. And they came up to me and they said, well, you can't do your communion. And I said, well, why not? I felt like I was a devout Catholic. And in fact, we had to get up in church and say our names with the saints. And I got up and said, Saint Lila. And although I was 9, I felt that something sounded a little off with Saint Lila, but I wasn't sure what until I was told that I wasn't allowed. So I went to my mother, who's a real character and this extraordinary woman, went to the school, and I remember sitting there, and she told the director of the school, if Jesus in person were coming back here, he would let this child do her communion. And they didn't let me. They wouldn't even baptize me. So that was my first clash with identity, and it was quite violent, and it was traumatic in some ways. But I realized many years later I was offered for another reason to be baptized. And this was a few years ago. And although I have a strong faith, I don't feel I belong to any religion, but I've always felt more, as a friend of mine says, more Judeo-Christian. I really did. This was a priest from a remote region of South America who was telling me, I'll baptize you. And I'll say, and I told him, I'm going to tell you something very shocking. And I'm sure you won't understand it, but I have to be honest with you. I feel this in my heart, but I don't want to be baptized. And I don't want to belong to a system. I don't want to belong to an institution. I feel fine on the border, and so that very much connects with the theme. I think that's what I feel about nationality. It's very difficult for me to define my nationality. I don't really have one. I feel very Iranian in many ways. I've become very European. Also, after 16 years, I've also become American in other ways. And it's the same thing. It's very much the same thing with religion. I don't feel I belong, and I feel I belong to all three, and maybe a few others. So there's a connection with always being on the border. I always feel that my place is being on the border, at the border, but then you have to open spaces of transgression. If I step into a church or in a synagogue, I know I'll always be seen as a foreigner. But that's okay. I've learned that my identity is to be also the transgressor, but in as respectful a way as possible, and sort of embracing the places where I am with my heart. And I think there's the transgressive is erotic in a way, because there's a space of friction. There's a space where you're trying to find your place. You're trying to there's a space of seduction, I would say also. There's a space of you're always you're always looking at yourself and the other also, as you feel your otherness. You're never quite one with the other. So all that is very connected to eroticism. But coming back to what you were saying, I do feel, in spite of the fact that there's a transgressive dimension, I do feel like I'm very interested in the mystical project, and I think that even for a person, and again for a writer like Nabokov, who wasn't religious at all, there's a deep mystical undercurrent in his work, and he says at one point that it's when he's catching butterflies amongst butterflies and their food plants that he feels a certain oneness with sun and stone, a thrill of gratitude to whom it may concern. And he says something that I thought of when you were speaking about the way you sometimes you have access to another reality. It happens to me all the time as well. I think I live for those moments. And he was saying that we live in a house, and sometimes we're surrounded by windows all the time. Sometimes, very rarely, the door opens and there's a sigh and a sough coming. But really, this other world surrounds us always. And I think our task, being at the border, being writers, is to catch those moments. And we may call them mystical or not, but for me they are very, very much. And I think when I'm at my best place in my writing, I try to open those windows.
You certainly weaved your net for Nabokov in your book, and sometimes you almost seem to consume him, because there's a paragraph by him and it just dissolves into your writing.
That's right. I did actually. I thought it was important also as a woman. He didn't like woman writers very much. He was very old school.
No, he didn't.
No,
That's true.
and he called them lady writers. He only tolerated Jane Austen, and he called her Jane. So of course, in my last chapter, I did consume him. I used his words, and I reconstructed a whole other world, thinking, now I'm taking over.
He would have loved you.
I think so too. I'm thinking I'm going to just revert back to Nabokov, because I don't remember if it's in Speak Memory or elsewhere that he says, or maybe in an interview, someone asked him, why do you live in a hotel? And he said, unless it's an accurate construction of my childhood home, I don't want anything else. I don't want to live in another house. Okay. And it's actually an identical question to all of you.
I want to hear them first.
Okay, so okay, I want to ask you. Okay, I'll ask you, Shimon, because it pertains to your writing in particular. Because I'm thinking we're living here in Israel. Jews are not dealing that good with territories, as you mentioned earlier. But here we are, nevertheless, each under her vine and her fig. But if it's not exactly that same vine and that fig, that same fig, does it have to be imagined?
First, yes.
As
if
a
it's
hotel,
not,
are we in a hotel
not,
of sorts?
It's not. If it's not exactly the same, then it's imagined. It's removed from reality. Then it's imagined by definition. But I don't have. Sometimes when I'm continuing the theme of dreaming and letting other reality crawl into your own experience of the world. So sometimes I grew up in a very big family, and whenever a child was born, then my parents were renting from from a housing company, which was a national housing company, and whenever a new child was born, then they would send people, mostly Palestinian, by the way. It was very interesting during the 80s to see my mother, especially speaking with Palestinians, but they use and they would change the structure of the house. They would add a room. They would add another bathroom, and so the house kept changing. So for me, there was no form to the house. It was fluid all the time, and I was moved between rooms. Sometimes I slept with another brother. Sometimes I was by my own. So also the notion of privacy and not having privacy, it wasn't part of the experience of growing up in a home. So for me, in a way, the experience of home became kind of incorporeal. Mm-hmm. It's a notion. For me, it's the food of my mother, which whenever I eat it, I feel at home. But also, I started to think about myself as a creature that lives within time and not within space. So, in a way, for me, being at home is having is
overwhelming idea.
yeah. In a way, my if I had to choose a home, then for me it would be this police box in which the TARDIS, in which Doctor Who is traveling throughout time.
Okay.
For me, this would be a perfect home.
Where is home for you, Dorit?
It's 18 Haigoz Street in Kfar Saba.
Excellent.
This is where I was raised, and where I was brought from the hospital too, and this is what I consider to be home. All in the past, let's say, 20 years, I have moved from 17 rented apartments. So maybe it's a good.
Almost like Dostoevsky, he moved 27 times in St. Petersburg to have a different angle of the city all the time because he thought it improved his writing. So, well done.
This wasn't the reason. I would have prefer to be not as good as Dostoevsky, but and lived in a common ground for longer. It's just that Tel Aviv had become such an expensive city to live in, and I have to move apartments.
But as you pointed out earlier in your last novel, your character, the Palestinian and Israeli Chilmi and Liat, they meet in New York, which is neither their hometowns, but. Do you feel somehow Chilmi has more of a connection with the earth, with the substantial placedness of this country than his Israeli counterpart in the book?
It's interesting that you say that. It's ever since the controversy, ever since the scandal, I became a very
advocate or a spokesperson.
No. I am surprised myself. I became a very popular within the settlements.
Really?
They read my novel and they write me letters, and they very and, yeah, they tell me I had to wait a long time in the library until your novel was returned back and I could borrow it, and they all repeat on saying an element from the novel, which is when Chilmi goes back to the West Bank, he rents a house in a small village in the north of Ramallah, which is called Jifna. It's 20 minutes from here. Time and space, you confused me. And they all write me. It was unbelievable. In their letters, it's always mentioned that Jifna is mentioned in Pirkei Avot, which is our, I don't know, what's the ethics of the fathers, thank you. And Jifna is named there Gofna, and it takes place at the very same spot in what is now north of Ramallah. And they say, you should know that Jifna is ours too. There, no. So Chilmi's connection to the ground is done from literary, maybe sentimental reasons, non-political. I thought it would be fair to have him return back to his homeland and be friends with the ground, with the soil, because he's about to lose his life within the waters of this land that he could never reach. This has a very strong political echo, the fact that he could never reach the horizon, the sea, the part of this, what his native homeland to be. But the garden that he flourishes, it's from sentimental matters less than political.
Okay, so back to this controversy, and speaking of borders, I assume that during the last year you've had to speak out in the world very often about this, about the controversy, about your book being banned. How did that go for you? I mean, how did you feel about representing what's going on here at this time and place, whether you're a creature of time or place?
To be honest, I have to defend Israel as I used to do earlier. It's just that now my interviewers and my readers, they come across with more worry to the Israeli democracy, and I have to say that my book is also not only a symbol of where Israel is heading to, and but also to how strong and fundamental the freedom of speech is rooted within the society, within the culture, and that the banning, the scandal aroused this huge march of Israelis supporting me and my book as a symbol of there is no way that the nation of the book of books would be recognized with banning books. So I'm very much became an ambassador of Israeli liberalism, maybe.
Shimon, you also have banned poetry in one of your novels that makes people transmogrify into all kinds of alien beings. But I want to ask you about being an ambassador for Israel as well. And in your last book, which is possibly the most flagrantly political of your books, because it's about the last war in Gaza, the character of the writer actually has to go to conferences in the world and defend Israel. Is that something that is real for you, or?
It was real. In a way, I was so really overwhelmed by what was happening in 2014 that the novel I wrote was trying to document what was happening, but in a fictional tools, with using fictional tools. And so there is, I came back to a character that I kind of abandoned. It was the character of my first novel, and just wrote 12 years afterwards what's going on with this character. And this character has a family in Sderot, the way and it started when the war started, when I was in France, and I was in a festival there. And it was so hard to be there because probably Dorit know this feeling in a way that you are you agree with some of the argument against Israel about the Israeli policy, but in a way you feel this undercurrents of anti-Semitism, in which that you are condemned for being Jew. It doesn't have to do with the political situation right now. It just enables this kind of burst of anti-Semitism, and it really peaked when I was reading from my poetry, and then there was a woman who came to the event, and she called out the state of Israel should be demolished. It doesn't have any rights to exist anymore. And the only thing I could have said was, I didn't know that it's the decision of French citizens to decide on the fate of Israel. But I was partly agreeing with her. I could understand the rage. I could understand the frustration because, in a way, I'm not going to repeat cliches because we don't have much time. But for me, yeah.
But this is the responsibility of being in hybrid identity, of having this hyphen kind of perspective. You identify and you contradict whatever is being said.
Yeah. You have to always take the other side in a way. You cannot agree with anyone. So in a way, for me, the only way to process it, because I was hearing about the bombardments in Gaza when I was in France, but when I was talking to my family, they were speaking about the missiles being shot at them. So for me, it was horrific, and the only way I know to deal with nightmares is to start writing them down. So that's how it came to be so political. But my intention was all the time metaphysical. It wasn't about the political stuff.
As ever. But there's another character in that same book, an American, or is she English, literary agent, that says, "Oh, you Sephardic Jews, you bitch about being discriminated." She's British, and that's just so that you don't pay heed to the suffering of the Palestinians. And she says that, and then you draw a very interesting parallel. She says it's as if a Scandinavian worker was complaining to an Eritrean refugee about the 5% wage cut.
And there is kind of a trap, which is has to do with the scales of suffering, because when first if we are going back to the sages of the Mishnah, they say the poor of your house
First.
They are first in line, and then the poor of your city and the poor of other countries. So you have to attend to the poorest of your house, of the people that lives near you. And it's interesting because when you widen the scope of, and then you see people that suffer more than you, and you start to ask about the legitimacy of your own suffering. But in Israel, it's complicated, much more complicated than that, because for people that came from Arab country, which called Sephardic sometimes, or Mizrahi, I don't know what's the correct term right now, they are supposed, in order to be part of the privileged population within Israel, they have to cooperate with the oppression. So in a way, they are fighting oppression, but they don't have any solidarity with other people being oppressed, because the only way to get out of their own state of being oppressed is to comply with the state with oppression of other populations. And I was trying to convey this.
Wow. Okay.
I might return us to the beginning of the conversation, is that us, Mizrahi Jews, Israelis born in Israel to families coming from Arab countries, we don't, with Muslim countries, we don't have the privilege.
Except we're not Arab countries.
This is an Arab country?
Well, no, ours are, or Iran
Arab
is
or
not.
Muslim.
Okay, no, I was referring to your 3 passports. This was where I was aiming to.
Non-European countries.
That we don't have the privilege to carry another passport except the Israeli passport unless we leave our homeland. So if you can spare one, I would be...
I'm more than happy to cut it in 2 since...
Because my friends, they do have German, Czech, Romanian, whatever European passports except for the Israeli. And I have no way I could go to an Iranian embassy. There is no such in Israel, and there is few in Europe, but I won't be let in. Iran, and being a Jew, I am not welcomed in Iran. And so it's a major thing that our homeland is truly our homeland, and we don't have resonance or some history that can connect us to another ground except the one we walk on. So it's an issue. Maybe next time you meet this agent, the British agent, maybe you should...
It's a fictional character.
It's a fictional character.
Okay.
So, Lila, you're exiles, immigrants. You're also involved with some foundations that deal with refugees, current refugee crises in Europe. How does that pertain to your experience as a refugee?
Well, I sit on the board of overseers of an organization called the International Rescue Committee, which was actually, it was an idea coming from Einstein to help Jewish artists and intellectuals get out of Europe in the 30s. And now it's become a huge organization. I was very honored that they asked me to be on their board. And they actually operate all around the world, and they help refugees in political crises and in environmental crises. Just one little thing about Iran is that, and this is really not at all in defense of Iran today, but one fact that is very that is not well known is that Iran still has 25,000 Jewish people living there, and it is the largest Jewish community outside of Israel in the Middle East. And we have 2 Iranian deputies in parliament, Jewish Iranian deputies sitting in parliament. I'm sure they can't. I'm sure that it's symbolic, and it's of course not. I mean, I would rather steer clear of any political comments, but it's interesting that it exists. And what I know of my Jewish Iranian friends before the revolution is that one lady called Roya Hakakian once wrote an essay in a small book that I had curated, and she said that before the revolution they felt so at home in Iran that during the Pesach prayer they would say next year in Tehran because they belonged and they wanted to stay. So and regarding refugees, yes, of course I'm part of that organization because it's a plight that I understand, especially having been stateless for 15 years. It was very difficult to get visas. We had documents that meant nothing. We don't have time for this anecdote, but I tried to get an Iranian passport, and my mother had to claim that I was slightly retarded and could not read Persian. I mean, there's so many, there are so many adventures and misadventures of the exile, the paperless, the stateless, and so on. That's why now I feel I need to collect them just to reassure myself that should one country explode, I still may have documents from another. But yes, look, it's a complicated world. I don't feel we're doomed. I always try to steer clear from political comments, but it is a very political environment here, of course, and it's impossible to pretend it doesn't exist. I love your country. That's why I'm here. I've always loved it. I was in Hebron yesterday with a group called Breaking the Silence, and a young man from Tzahal, who was a former IDF soldier, was there and talking about what his own experiences very, very honestly. And it was disturbing for me because I've always felt very, very connected to this land for reasons I can't quite even explain, maybe I could, but it was a difficult, very intense day, and he explained his experiences, what he had done, all his misgivings, the situations, things that I didn't know, and it made me think very hard. But then what was most, I thought this morning when I woke up, I thought what was extraordinary about this young man, Yehuda, was that he loves his country. He was doing all this and taking all of us there because he loves his country and he wants a better country. And he believes that it's possible. It's difficult, it's very difficult, but he loves his country. And that's the country that I want to believe in as well, you know.
As we all. Okay, so I want to wrap up with an identical question to all of you. As you may remember from The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy had a pair of magical red shoes, which she had to click 3 times to get home. No, you go first. I think you go first. Okay, click. Dorit, you imagine you're clicking your red shoes 3 times. Where are you? You can close your eyes and imagine it. And then tell me where you are.
It's a current place.
It can be anywhere you get to.
You can also travel within time.
You travel in time. I'm sorry. The intuition brought rude thought to my mind.
Rude. Go ahead with your rude. No, go ahead.
Forget it. Let's travel in time.
Rude or root?
Rude.
Why rude?
She's thinking that's where her red shoes brought her.
Where you want to be the sweetest place you want to be in. You start.
Okay, Shimon, your go. Where are you?
No, it's also it's not a
It's also rude?
No, it's not rude. It's as I said, it's not a place but a moment in time, and I probably would like to be either at the moment when everything came into be or after everything is
Finished.
already gone.
Wow. Beautiful.
This is an author's answer, you see? This is how authors should answer.
Lila?
I guess my answer is completely silly, but the reason why I feel we're not doomed is, and I appreciated your comment about liveliness so much, is that I feel there's a part of me that transcends always the complications and the pains, because there's a part of me that's always deeply optimistic and very alive. And so I have the silliest of answers. I'm just really happy to be here. You know?
Wow, that's so beautiful.
I take it. Thank you very
very
much.
much.
Thank you
Just
very
want
much.
another passport.
Yeah. Okay. By the way, any diplomats around here, I'll take another passport.
So thank you very much for all of you.
Thank you
Thanks
so
for being
much.
here.
Thank you, Shlomzion Kenan.